Feeling fine and excited to host the session and our incredible speaker today. So, I am Carl, your host for the session. Thank you for tuning in to the session brought to you by LIMS Review Center, the Princeton Review Philippines, AUG Philippines, and AECC Philippines. For this session, we'll be having another country talk for Canada. The speaker will be discussing whether the particular location of their college played a role in their decision making, as well as other factors they considered when assessing their chosen college destination. Before we proceed with the talk, let's lay down the house rules. Please do not spam the question and answer box or send any inappropriate messages. Everyone at camp is working very hard to make your conference experience amazing. Please be respectful at all times. All questions must be sent in the Q&A box. Questions in the chat box might get lost in all the messages. Now that we are familiar with the house rules, please allow me to introduce our speaker for the session. Sanya is an incoming second-year student at the University of Toronto, pursuing a bachelor's in computer science. Over the years, she has tried to combat the digital divide in the Philippines by teaching local students how to code. Along with being the founder of her school's STEM club, she started an organization called She Leads Forward that aims to teach young women the basic leadership skills so that they can create change, and has been featured on CNN Philippines. In her free time, she likes to run, read, and design prototypes of apps. Everyone, please welcome our speaker, Ms. Sanya Chawla.
Hi there. It's nice to see you all. I'll just start sharing my screen and we can get this presentation started. Yeah. Besides that, I hope everyone's doing well. So today I'm going to be talking about Canada, everything you need to know regarding the college process, living there, and what it's like to study there. So what is that? I am going to, thanks Carl for giving me a really nice introduction. So as you mentioned, I am an incoming second-year student at University of Toronto. I'm really passionate about computer science, so I'm on track of completing my bachelor's in computer science. I have a really fun fact about me is that I really like to run. And so over the past year, I've ran 3 half marathons and I'm on track of running a full marathon this October. Actually, it's going to be in Canada, so that'll be interesting. I don't like the cold, which is also interesting, especially if you're aware about Canada and how they have like one of the longest winters. So that has been interesting. I will touch up on like adjusting to the cold and tips and tricks on how to do that later. So stay tuned if you're interested about that. And lastly, I'm really interested in going down the software engineering route. So like after college, I hope to like pursue that and go into the tech field, just so you guys have some context about what I'm studying and why I'm studying it. So this whole talk is going to be about Canada, anything you need to know about like the college application process. One thing to note is that like the college application process is kind of different compared to the process in the States, UK, Australia. So it's really good to be aware about like the timeline, how it works, how easy it is. Living in Canada is also like definitely an adjustment coming from the Philippines. I'll give you some context. So I'm originally from India, but I've been living in the Philippines for about 9 years. So before going to Canada, I was really used to like the tropics and everything. So going there is definitely an adjustment. And what it's like to even study there, how different it is from the high school system over here. So yeah, let's get started. Here are a couple pictures that I've taken over the past year. Canada does have like 4 seasons, so it gets really pretty all throughout the year. And it's like always a good change. And so yeah, so now let's get started with the like a general overview of the application process, what it's like getting all the college and university things sorted. I would like to give a little context. So when I was applying for schools in Canada, I was mainly looking at the Ontario side, which is like the Toronto area, but then there's also like a couple like cities near people call it like the GTA, which is the Greater Toronto Area. So it doesn't only include the Toronto city, and includes like cities like Waterloo, and like Scarborough, Mississauga, and things like that. Then there's also like other provinces with other schools. Another big province is British Columbia, so that's where Vancouver is. Now, since I didn't really apply to those schools, but I was able to talk to a couple of my friends and get a general gauge. So I'll be relaying some information about what their thoughts are in terms of like the whole college application. But I can mainly help with like applying to Ontario, just so you guys are aware. I've also included like a couple of the major colleges within Canada. This isn't all of the colleges by any means, so there are tons more great colleges over there. These are a couple of the ones that I've heard of, and uh, yeah, and when I was applying to college, I mainly was applying to University of Waterloo and University of Toronto, both for computer science. So now you must be wondering, what are the documents that are needed in order to apply for school in Canada, and like, are you eligible? So as far as I'm concerned, as long as you are on track of completing high school and getting a high school diploma, you should be well on your way to apply for schools in Canada, especially undergrad. So you definitely need a high school diploma. You need a transcript with all your grades that most of the time your school will send over to the designated institutions that you're interested in. And then on top of that, you also need to prove that you are proficient in English, which is something that I also was not aware of initially. And what you can do, and it depends from school to school, but what is that sometimes your high school and your English course within your high school is enough to show that you are proficient in English. So for example, I did the IB program, the International Baccalaureate program in high school, and the English course within that program was enough to show that I was proficient in English. But then sometimes if it's not enough, then you'll need to take like a standardized test. So there's the IELTS, there's the TOEFL, there are like a couple other ones, but those are pretty straightforward, and you would have to just like study a couple weeks in advance, take the test, and submit your scores to just show that you're proficient in English. One thing I will say is that I did apply to the States as well for college. And personally, I do believe that the college application process for Canada was a lot easier in comparison to the States, because in the US, they really prioritize like you being a well-rounded student, right? So you need to have your extracurriculars set, you need to have like a sports, you need to have good grades, you need to have leadership. So like they really want to like make sure you're well balanced. Canada like also wants to make sure you're well balanced, but they really emphasize your grades out of everything. So they want to see what your grades are like, and whether you'll be able to adapt to their system. So now let's look at the typical timeline of what it's like from like the beginning of like you deciding I want to go to Canada for school to the very end of you actually ending up in Canada and studying there. So here are a couple of the steps that I've displayed on the screen, and now I'm just gonna like walk over all those steps like in detail. So the first important step is choosing a school and a program. So like I don't know if you guys were here for the previous talk, like Warwick was mentioning, that research is really important. Okay, I cannot emphasize like enough how important research is, because at the end of the day, this is where you're going to be spending the next 4 years, 4 to 5 years of your life. And it's very important to make sure that the place that you want to go to is the right fit for you, and it is the right is the place where you want to be in. Different schools have different strengths, right? I know some schools have really good sports programs. Some schools have really nice like location and academics. Some schools excel in specific like majors. For example, like I've heard like Waterloo is really good at computer science. Waterloo is really great in tech majors. Whereas I know University of Toronto, one of their strong suits is psychology and business. So it's it's important in like when you're making your decision about what schools you want to apply for and like evaluating what their strengths are and how good they are. On top of that, you also want to make sure that the program you're interested in or the program you're applying for is the right fit for you. When I was in college this past year, I know so many people who like kind of felt trapped in their major, and they like had a couple of regrets about like they were in like an engineering major and they wish that they had applied for business instead, or they wish they had applied for computer science instead because it aligned with their interests. So the earlier you start your research, the better like you'll get a better idea of what program you want to be in. And the thing is, sometimes like schools like University of Toronto um, are like a little strict, whereas if you have gotten into their engineering program, you can't really like shift around into that many other majors. You can go into life science, but you won't necessarily be able to go into their business major because it's like very competitive. So yeah, do your research. One thing that's interesting that I noticed that is not there like in the school, that's not for the States, is that you can apply to the same school but multiple times, and each different time would be for like a different program. So I'll just say that again because I know I didn't say that well. But say, for example, I want to apply to the University of Toronto. I'm interested in their engineering program. I'm interested in their computer science program. I'm interested in their psychology program. And I'm interested in their business program, right? Whoa, those are 4 different programs, but I can apply to all 4 of them. And each 4 of those applications will be evaluated differently. So at the end of the day, I will like submit 4 different applications to University of Toronto. There's a centralized process that I'll go into later that makes it easier for you to submit those 4 different applications. But you submit those 4 different applications, there's a chance you can get rejected from all 4 of them. There's a chance you can get accepted into all 4 of them, or you can get into like a couple of them, like 2, 1, 3. Yeah, so and then from there, once you get accepted into the various programs that you applied for, then you can decide whether you want to go down a certain track. So that's a little bit about choosing the school and the program. The next thing is preparing the paperwork. So like I mentioned before, the main documents that you need are your high school diploma or your like or letters from your school showing that you're on track. And then later when you get into the school and you finish high school, then you can send over your diploma, your transcript, and the fact that you're proficient in English. Then after that, each school will have their own specific admission requirements. So based on top of the basic information that you've provided, they might want to know more about you and why you're applying for that certain program or why you're applying for the certain school. So then that's the in that case, it will be the school who reaches out to you and asks for that additional information. So, for example, they'll be like, can you write an essay about why you want to join computer science? What makes you unique amongst your peers? And things like that. And then so you would need to submit those specific admission requirements. I know for the University of Waterloo, another thing that they also requested was a letter of recommendation from either my math teacher or my computer science teacher, because I was applying for computer science at Waterloo, right? So they wanted to get to know like what I was like as a student there. And then after that, you submit your application. And what's the most nerve-wracking part is waiting. You will have like different portals for the different schools, and they'll have different status updates. where they'll send you emails on the track, like on the progress of your application. Now, what's really stressful, and I'll say this is what I experienced, is that sometimes they release the admission results in different batches. So there was a case where like all my friends got their acceptance from University of Toronto, and I had not heard back. And I was like so stressed for like a month because I was like, oh no, did I get rejected or something? But then it's just they released admission decisions in batches, and I got to know mine like a month or two later, which was pretty fun. And then after that, once you've gotten into your programs or the schools, or there's a case where maybe you got into multiple schools and multiple programs, you will have to finally commit to one program and one school. So that's where research comes in again and making sure that the school is the right fit for you. And then you apply for a student permit, which takes like a month or two. And applying for a student permit from Canada, from the Philippines to Canada, requires several different documents again. So that's a little bit of a process. But once you have that, you can go to Canada and you can finally study there, which is the best part. So then it'll all be worth it in the end. All the blood, sweat, and tears will have finally um, been worth it, and you would have gone to Canada. So here I've included a couple of pictures of what the portals look like, the application portals. So like I mentioned before, I mainly applied to schools in Ontario. And what's really convenient is that Ontario has a centralized application process. So all you need to do is basically go to Ontario. Oh, we call it UAC, OAC. And you input all your personal information, you input all your school information, your academic history, things like that. And then on top of that, you also have to include like the specific institute that you're interested in applying to and the program. So University of Toronto Computer Science, and then you can add more of those fields. So you can be like University of Toronto Computer Science, University of Toronto Psychology, University of Waterloo Computer Science, etc., etc. I will say that every single school that you add, every single program that you add, you will have to pay additional fees. And this sometimes the fees do like add up. I know it's like it ranges from like $50 to $100 per school. So that is something you would need to take into an account. But if you can apply to as many programs and schools as possible, like if you're debating between two or three different programs, I recommend you apply for all three of those programs if you can. It's just so that you have the option. On top of that, um, programs like computer science and engineering are starting to become, or like are really competitive. So the chances, I don't know, it's most of the time it's really hard to get into. And I will say, like, I applied for University of Waterloo Computer Science. I didn't get into that. And I do regret not applying to other programs within Waterloo because I really like the school in general, and that was my dream school. I love University of Toronto, and don't get me wrong, but like I do regret not applying to more programs under Waterloo. Um, and yeah, so just apply to as many as possible. Once you apply at UAC, what they'll do is they'll send each of those individual applications to the institutes themselves. And then from there, UFT, Waterloo, like Western, they'll reach out to you individually and be like, we've received your application. Here's a application timeline. In case they want additional documents from you, they'll ask you to submit like a 200, 300 word essay on why you want to come to that school. And then you get to know the decision. There are other schools like outside of Ontario, and sometimes schools not included in the lists provided by UAC, that have their own application. So to be specific, UBC, which is University of British Columbia, they have their own application that you need to fill out on their website directly. So there's no centralized application. You go to their website, you be like, I'm interested, and then you fill out the personal information, academic history, general information. Um, I realize this is a funny picture to include because it's like there's a problem connecting to the server. I'm sorry about that. But yeah, no, you include the information that they request from you and then you submit. Um, yeah, so that's a little bit about the application process. I cannot like this is so important, but you need to make sure that the college you end up going to is the right fit for you. And like I don't know if you guys have started college talks in your school or you've seen videos and things like that, but something that so many people talk to and you'll hear so many times is like a school needs to be a good fit for you, fit. Um, and like they're not wrong because you want to make sure that the school fits with you, aligns with what you want academically, socially, and financially, right? Like the academics should be okay. Um, the school should be well equipped and with resources of the intended major that you want to be in. They should have good research opportunities, good programs for that. They should have enough if diversity is something that you prioritize, or if like a Filipino cultural club is something that you really want and you need, make sure that school has that. um and like location also is another thing that you should take into account, whether you want your school to be directly in the city, whether you want your school to be a little farther away from a city, so it's like more college town, campus town, or whether you want um yeah, the school to be like completely isolated. So I know like UFT, to be specific, is within the city. And I really prefer that. They call it like an urban setting. And that's because, say, for example, you're like, I'm done. I've had enough of school. You take a 10-minute walk and you're already in the city. You are in the city, but like you can take a 10-minute walk and go to the different part of a city. You can go to like the harbor front. You can just get a little bit of a break, which I appreciate. Public transport's also really accessible. Whereas Waterloo is more of like a college town. So in order to come to the downtown Toronto, it's like an hour or 2 hour commute, which you'll be willing to go through. And lastly, you also want to make sure that if financial aid is something that you're looking for, that college provides that and meets with your needs financially as well. So yeah. Now, this is also another regret that I had, and it was not reading up on the scholarships available. Okay, being an international student, costs do add up, right? And so, even if you aren't like in need and like of financial aid, I really suggest that you take a look into all the scholarships available because there's so many I'll like go into the different scholarships in a second, but there's so many different scholarships available, and like who knows, if you like even apply for them and you get some extra money, that could always go a long way. And that could always just help you out, that could help your family out and just reduce the burden of the hectic costs of like studying abroad, right? So there's this thing called entrance scholarships that you apply for when you apply to that certain school. This is not related to like whether you need financial aid or not. Um, and most of the time for this, you just submit like an extra essay of why you are like why you're passionate about computer science or what makes you a different student compared to your peers. There are government funded scholarships available as well. So Canada does provide like specific scholarships that you can apply for schools. There are program specific scholarships. So most of the time the schools will have like 10 allocated slots for computer science, 10 slots for business, 10 slots for the other majors, right? financial aid scholarships where you provide, if you are in need for some assistance, you can provide like the essential documentations of the documentation, and then they'll be able to evaluate and provide money based on that. Merit scholarships, which this is one where you don't apply for, you get when you get accepted into the school. So say when you submit your transcript to the college and they see that you're like your academics have been really good throughout high school, sometimes they'll give you an award being like, here's a couple $1,000, um, and you can like get some. Um, I know at University of Toronto, they give out merit-based scholarships that are really hefty, like that are as much as 100,000 Canadian dollars, which can come really helpful. So you'll get the $100,000 over the course of 4 years. Um, and then on top of that, there's also like awards within school. So after your first year, if you get really high grades, sometimes your professors might award you with some like money. There are privately funded scholarships available too by businesses outside. So I'm sure there are like voluntary organizations that you can take a look at that can provide you with some help. There's some miscellaneous ones too uh, that are more about like that are also by organizations outside the school. And then there's country specific scholarships, which are also provided by the college. So I know UBC and UFT have ASEAN specific scholarships that they've like put in place. So I recommend you taking a look into that and see if you can, you're eligible. And lastly, another really cool thing that Canada offers, a couple of the institutes in the US also offer this, but it's mainly big in Canada, is their cooperative um sorry, co-curricular operative program, or as people call it, their co-op program, which is essentially a built-in internship into your education. So I'll be going into that right now, into more specific. And I think this co-op program is what made me like choose Canada out of all the other schools. And it's because their emphasis on like it's just a very cool thing. Okay. So essentially a co-op program allows you to study and also work and earn at the same time. So different institutes have different layouts of how their co-op program works. But what you'll do is basically you'll study for like a period of time. And then after that, the school will help you find an internship related to your major. So then you will take a little break from studying and then go do the internship, get paid for that internship, then come back, study, and then sometimes you go do it again. They're like multiple rounds. My dream school was Waterloo because Waterloo is notorious for having one of the best co-op programs. If you're interested in technology and interested in computer science, I definitely recommend checking University of Waterloo out. University of Toronto does have co-op programs too, and they do have inbuilt internship programs as well. But it's not as good as Waterloo. Um, and the greatest thing about this is that you work, you earn, it will get a little hectic, but by the time you're finished with university, you've most likely earned back all the money that you've given to that university from your internships. So the amount of student debt that you have is like has reduced significantly. And your resume is like fully stacked with like work experience, which is always helpful when applying for jobs after university. So I definitely suggest looking at the co-op programs available. Multiple schools in Canada offer co-op programs. Tons of them do, and tons of them offer different types of co-op programs. So look into that as well. Just so that you know, because it's a very cool thing to be a part of, and always getting that extra experience can always can come in handy. So that was a little bit about the application process, why Canada stood out to me in terms of applying, like in terms of like colleges and stuff. Now I want to give you a little bit of an overview on what it's like to actually live in Canada. So living in Canada also comes like being an international student, there are like different costs as well, like on top of what you're paying for school. So I feel like that's important to go over because I really didn't consider this, but this is very important. Um, Housing is something that you definitely need to consider. So whether you want to live on campus or whether you want to live off campus, um, schools do provide dorms and housing options. But if that does not fit you and you live in an apartment nearby, you also need to take into consideration the commute that you have to do between the place that you're staying and where your classes are. Food is another big thing. So again, if you decide to live on campus, and you decide to go live in one of the dorms, most of the time they do have meal plans and dining halls offered to you. Obviously, you have to pay for those, or you wanna not do that and cook by yourself. So you have to buy groceries. You have to eat out at restaurants from time to time. Canada does have Jollibee, by the way. Toronto has Jollibee. So if you guys are ever homesick, you can always go to Jollibee. It's definitely a little bit more expensive than the Jollibee over here. But it's always good to go at from time to time. Public transport is another thing where you have to put a little bit of money. It's not that expensive, but it does add up over the months. So for example, if I have to use the subway, every time I tap, it takes about like $3, right? So if within a month, like depending on how many times you use the subway, costs about like 50 to $100 if you live away from campus. Clothes is a big thing, okay? Now, don't underestimate this, but since you all are coming from the Philippines and if you want to go to Canada, winter is huge there, right? So you will have to invest a good amount of money into good winter gear. So that would be gloves, hats, thermal wear, a good coat, and things like that. Um, So clothes is another big thing. School supplies, so textbooks that your professors will ask you to buy, a laptop, a good working laptop, notebooks, pencils, etc. Friends, from time to time, you will have get-togethers with your friends. You will go out to restaurants. You will go out in general, and that will take some portion of your money. And what's the worst and the most painful are the flights. I don't know if you guys have looked into the cost of flights from Manila to Canada, like Toronto or Vancouver. But the prices do get a little hefty and especially in peak season. So say for example, you want to come back during Christmas time, um, the prices can get a little crazy. So you guys should take that into consideration as well and put some money towards that. And that's why, like I mentioned before, it's always good to look at the scholarships because a little bit of extra money can always go a long way. What I really like about Canada, and it is a little bit of a change coming from the Philippines, is um, how diverse they are. They have like tons of immigrants, like especially in the downtown area, the greater downtown area as well. They have a huge population of non-Canadians. So coming from India, being from India, it was a little bit of a culture shock for me too, experiencing that many Indians. You don't see that many Indians as definitely here in the Philippines. So I was like, whoa, that's too many Indians even for me. Because I've never lived in India. But that it's always nice. They're all really friendly. there is a huge Chinese population and there's a huge Filipino population as well. So anytime you're homesick, especially if you live in one of the major cities, you can always find something to do. There are tons of like Sunday, Saturday markets that are like specific to like the Philippines, right? So you can find so many things. Um, I remember one time I was craving, I don't know if I can say it, I was craving Sanya Light, right? They don't sell Sanya Light in Canada, but then I went to one of the markets that they had and I found it there and I got really happy. So that's one thing that's really good about Canada is that they have a huge Filipino population. So you'll always feel like home. Right? But there are some adjustments that you need to get used to. So, like I mentioned, they do have a huge like they have a diverse population, but that might be an adjustment for you too, right? Like maybe you're not used to that many Indians, or maybe you're not used to that many having that many different cultures and interacting with different types of people and different things. Most of them are nice, most of them are really cool, but that's something you need to get used to. Um, I've lived in NCR and what is that? I don't from a day-to-day basis, I don't come across lots of crackheads. in in Canada, the amount of crackheads that you come across to will like scare you a little. So crackheads meaning like people who are homeless or people who have like drug addictions and then they'll like say random things or say things. So you won't be as much of like you won't be in a bubble anymore because you'll be exposed to that type of those types of people. So that's also a little bit of an adjustment. Um, the winter is a big adjustment. I remember walking to class in like 4 inches of snow. Like that's not fun. Uh, Another thing is that like the amount of sunlight, especially during peak like winter months, reduces significantly. So the sun rises late, like around 9 or 8, and sets relatively early, around like 3 p.m., 4 p.m. So you would definitely need to get used to that. You would need to like prime your brain for that because you get sleepy early. You're not able to go out as often. There are no parks because all like it's covered in snow and stuff. So that really like affects you a little, and it sometimes also does affect your mental health. We're taking a look into that. Um, Coming from the Philippines, you have like stunning nature over here. But then the good thing is that in Canada, they also really have great reservoirs, great parks, and things like that that you'll be able to explore from time to time. Canada does really prioritize like mental health and having a well-balanced life. So you'll find that most of the stores and most of the malls end up closing at around 6 p.m., 7 p.m. Whereas here, like I know, like I don't know if you know, like Esamora High Street, they close at around 10 p.m. Or like sometimes even later. So that's something you need to get used to. It's a good thing. But yeah. And now let's look at a little bit of what it's like to actually study in Canada. And this I'll be talking about like very heavily from my perspective, what it's like to live in, what it's like to go to UFT and actually like study the study culture there and how different it is. So, like I mentioned before, being an international kid can actually be a perk going in Canada because there's so many international students there. Especially in UFT, I would say that like majority of the people there are Indians and Chinese. So, like if you are an international kid, you actually sometimes fit in more than being a local kid because of the huge international population over there. What's really great is that many of the schools have tons of cultural clubs that are there that you'll always be able to partake in, and they're not even restricted to like what your nationality is, right? So you would be able to like join the Indian Cultural Club, or I was able to join events from PCC, the Philippines Cultural Club, the Filipino Cultural Club. So that's really nice. There's always something going on in downtown or like in the major cities. So you'll be able to go to those. The schools as well, like they offer support systems for international students. They have like guidance counselors, mental health support, and things like that for people who are having a little bit of a hard time adjusting to the new area and the new surroundings. But each school is different at the end of the day. And I also suggest that you research and see whether the institute that you're applying to has the proper support in place for international students. And I also want to talk about a little bit about my experience at UFT, some of like the culture shocks I had coming from the Philippines and then going to school in Canada. Um, Here are a couple of photos. But one thing I didn't expect was the the emphasis on education. I like hearing, I don't know, I feel like UFT really prioritizes academics, and it's very like go, 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 go. So you barely have breaks throughout the year. You have like 1 week called reading week, which is right before midterm exams. And so that week is actually, even though it's a holiday, you spend that week studying and preparing for your midterms that are gonna come up the next week, right? And onwards. So it's very like academics heavy. But besides that, they have really great professors. They have really great internship opportunities. They have really great research opportunities. And the amount of clubs that UFT offers specifically is great. Um, this is me running in the snow. This is in campus only. So I don't know if you can see, I don't know how good this picture is, but like this is like one of the buildings I had my class in. This is the pavement. And then as you can see, as you like walk right outside, this is like the buildings, and this is apartments and companies that start to come up like 2 minutes later. So if you're sick and tired of school, you just like walk directly out of campus and you're outside of school already. It's not a gated school. So there are crackheads, but that's been interesting. That's been nice. This is us at like a cultural event, an Indian cultural event. So they do have really great support for international kids in particular. And something really funny that I want to share is that there was a point last year when the math department had to send like everyone taking the specific math course, that like it's sad that I have to make this announcement, but I do. I've received reports that some office hours were unpleasant due to students who don't take care of their personal hygiene. Please be polite to your fellow students, shower daily, and use deodorant. So they literally had to send us an email and like a reminder to take a shower and use deodorant. So this was like an ultimate computer science math moment, because only here will you experience that. And the thing is, this email actually became a meme, so like it kind of spread to other schools and things like that, and people reached out to me and they're like, is it true that people stink up the place? It's not true. Okay, I don't know, like every now and then you'll come across like a computer science or like a math student who is just trying to get their like academics together. Okay, they're just trying. But yeah, that's about it from my side. I was wondering if any of you guys had questions or things that you were wondering. So I see a couple questions in the chat. Carl, is it okay if I just answer them directly?
Hello.
Yeah.
Thank you for this talk, but Before we wrap the session up, we'll open the floor for a question and answer session. Remember to send your questions in the question and answer box and not the chat box. So there are questions already in chat box. Let's check them. First question is, while studying abroad, will we also have to cover our own living expenses as students, or are there any other alternatives for this?
Yeah. Okay, that's a great question. So it depends on like the scholarship that you get in particular. So if you do have like I know some financial aid scholarships, they do provide like an allowance of additional money to help like with the living expenses or with housing and all of that. But if you don't have that, then most likely you have to burden the cost of like actually going to Canada, living there, food, etc.
Great. Thank you so much for answering the question. I got another question which asks, hello, I'm not sure if this was tackled already since I came in late, but do you need the SAT or ACT to apply? If yes, what would be a good score range?
Okay, also another great question. So you don't need to an SAT or an ACT score. I think that's mainly for the schools in the States. But like I mentioned before, most of the schools do want to see if you're proficient in English. So they will require an IELTS or a TOEFL score. Now, if the school doesn't apply for if the school doesn't ask for an IELTS or TOEFL score, you will also need to submit the score when applying for a Canadian study permit. So if the school doesn't ask for it, the country will ask for it. So just make sure you'll be able to prove that you're proficient in English. Sometimes your high school program is sufficient and enough to show that you are as well. Hope that.
Thank you so much. So a similar question asks, do they accept grades from your grades from the Philippine curriculum?
Yes, definitely. So you don't need to take the SAT or the ACT. I think you would need to submit your transcript and the grades that you've gotten over the years.
Right. Thank you so much. Another question asks, if I apply to multiple programs, do I have to pay a separate application fee for each?
Yes, that's right. So like I remember for University of Toronto and even Waterloo, the range was anywhere between $50 to $100 per program. So each program you apply to, you have to pay for.
All right. Thank you so much.
So sorry, I'll just add onto that. It's also about like finding a good balance, right? Like I mentioned, apply to as many programs and schools as possible, but also make sure that it doesn't like add up in terms of cost. And yeah, and also don't apply for programs that you know you'll get into, but you have no interest in because then at the end of the day, you will just be overwhelmed with so many decisions to choose from. When you have to actually commit to a school.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Someone asks, I've heard that it's really hard to get scholarships in Canada. Is this true?
So it depends on the school and it depends on the program. University of Toronto has a really good reputation of giving like good scholarships. And the thing is that it also depends on the department. So they have a really strong business program that's very well funded. So a lot of my classmates who are in the business program, they were able to get like good scholarships for that. Whereas like the underfunded departments weren't as lenient on giving those scholarships. So I think if you apply to like the top programs for universities, they'll most likely have better scholarships in terms of like the non-top programs. So yeah, I recommend doing some research regarding that.
Thank you so much. Another person asked regarding scholarships as well. Can we apply for more than one scholarship every year, or are we limited to only having one scholarship?
I'm not too sure about this. According to my understanding, I think you should be able to apply for multiple scholarships, especially if they're like they're the ones that they're the non-financial aid ones. Um, I know that even throughout school, there will be opportunities to also apply for scholarships, but you will need to like provide extra documentation or extra essays onto why you need that money or how that money can help you.
Thank you so much for answering the question. So someone asked the question, is there something similar to the Common App for the US when it comes to applying to Canadian schools?
Yes, so I'll just go to that slide really quickly again. So as if you're specifically applying to schools in the Greater Toronto area or within Ontario, there's like a centralized application system. I think like schools in British Columbia besides UBC also have something similar where you apply for your programs and the schools through this website called OAC. And then from there, that specific school will reach out to you, give you like a portal to sign into, and then you can provide additional information like the supplementary essays or the letter of recommendations that they are in need for. But through this website, you just provide like basic information like your academic history, details about like your contact information and things.
All right, thank you so much. Another question, it asks, hello, do you know any universities in Canada with strong programs in biology or chemistry? Would you recommend the University of Toronto as an option?
Oh yeah, definitely. I would say like a couple of the top schools that are really good at biochemistry are like University of Toronto, UBC, and Waterloo. Like those are, I would say, like the top. University of Toronto does have a really good life science program, and it's also really good for pre-med as well if you're interested.
Thank you so much for answering the question. And another question asks, in Toronto, what is the most common commuting mode?
Ooh, okay. So the subway, there's this thing called the streetcar. I did include pictures of this, so I'll just show this to you. So this is a streetcar that's pretty well connected throughout Toronto, especially near the campus area. The subway is also pretty handy. But if you live close by campus, it's super convenient to walk. So most of the time, even if the commute's like 15, 20 minutes or even 30 minutes, most of my friends and I, we just end up walking to the place because they're really nice pavements. It's a safe area to stay in. And I don't know if you were here for that part, but I did say that there are crackheads that you encounter every now and then, but they are safe crackheads. They won't do anything. They won't mind. They like just mind their business, but like you do encounter them from time to time. That makes sense. Yeah. But then you can also take like bikes, electric scooters, things like that.
Thank you so much for answering the question. I got another question here. If we were to enroll into a school in Vancouver, could you
Mhm.
give an estimate for the cost of living expenses?
Yeah, for sure. So I think it depends like if so I know like the apartments and things like that, they end up ranging like so my friend, she has like a two-bedroom apartment that's a little bit close to campus. So she ended up paying about somewhere between like 2,000 to 3,000 Canadian dollars. So it all depends on like how close you are to the city, how close you are to the school. Um, Vancouver and Toronto do tend to be like higher in terms of like the living expenses when it comes to that. That's all I know. I'm sorry that explanation was not too detailed. If
All
you
right.
want
I'd
to
just
get
like to add to that. Can you go into detail on like the total living expenses you had in, say, Toronto?
yeah, for sure. So like in terms of like the dorms and the housing,
Yep,
like
total you'd spend as a student,
okay,
aside
cool.
from tuition.
Cool. So I ended up so I lived on campus for 8 months, right? So 8 months was the whole thing. I ended up paying $12,000 for my dorm and an additional 3,000, $4,000 for the food that was available in the in the dining hall at my campus. And then on top of that, given everything else, like given going out, supplies, clothes, and everything, I ended up spending about 600, 700 Canadian dollars per month.
All right. Thank you so much for answering the question. Guys, participants, if you have more questions, you could always ask them now.
It is like Canada is definitely more expensive than staying in the Philippines. So that's something you do need to be a little prepared for. Um, and I think one thing that took me as a shock out of everything was like the ticket prices. So they do that.
All right, just again, once a reminder to everyone, if you have any questions, you could send them in the question and answer box.
So if you guys have um if you guys have questions later and still would like to even get on like a one-on-one Zoom call to know about the specific process of like going through college applications and things like that, feel free to reach out. So I have a personal website that's under the name of sanyachawla.com. And within that website, you'll get to know a little bit more about me, but also you'll have access to my LinkedIn and my email. So if you want to get in touch, even if you want to get to know more about running and other things, feel free to reach out. I'd love to connect with you.
Okay, since I think there are no more questions, that concludes our Q&A session. Thank you for your active participation. I hope that our beloved speaker was able to shed light on your curiosities and concerns. I think she has already displayed her website for contact details. So if you want to reach out to Miss Sanya for more questions about applying to Canada, you can always send her a question through her website, or if you'd mind sharing your email.
Yes, I'll put it in the chat as well. So this is my email, and then this is my website, which also includes my email.
Thank you so much, Miss Sanya. On behalf of CAMP's 2023 facilitation team, I would like to extend our sincerest gratitude and appreciation to you for sharing with us your valuable insights today. We're also grateful for you accepting our panel invitations. Let's give a round of applause for Sanya.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope you guys were able to learn a little bit more about Canada and the application process. I hope you guys all have a good day.